You can't get standard.
It's hard to get a standard.
And in Britain, they're everywhere.
Yeah.
You can hardly find an automatic in Britain, and in this country, you can hardly find a.
So when did that happen? In the past decade or so? 'Cause I
Yeah.
have a little, little Volkswagens, and I love them.
Oh, are we live?
We
Okay, no more talking dirty. We're live.
That was clever. Okay, here we go. Good morning, Mr. Letty. Thank you for your patience. I don't know why I was so optimistic on our schedule. As you know, and I know, whenever we talk solid waste, we get a lot of energized conversations, and they take longer than I think. So thank you for staying on, and even though we're running behind, and love to hear if you could reintroduce yourself to the committee, so people will know on whose behalf you're speaking. We'd love to hear about how you look at the bottle bill that's in front of us and issues around glass handling more generally as well.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me and welcome. I am John Letty. I'm the Executive Director of the Northwest Vermont Solid Waste Management District. We represent Grand Isle and Franklin counties. Yeah, so to step back, the bottle bill is, really a parallel system of waste management. As you heard, the container deposit on beverage containers helps capture those materials through the deposit system. We at solid waste management entities around the state manage all waste, and so we are working to reduce, reuse, recycle, and then ultimately responsibly dispose of all waste that's produced. So everything that you see in the shelves at the grocery store is eventually, the packaging is going to be a waste, as is the product at some point. So the Northwest Solid Waste District, we operate 5 recycling and trash drop-off facilities, and we manage the materials that are not captured by the bottle bill. So whether that's beverage containers that aren't returned for the deposit, or items that don't fall under the purview of the bottle bill. Speaking just directly to the material that's concerned by the bill that's in front of you, so what's currently covered under the bottle bill, as well as the expanded items, we send those containers to the Chittenden Solid Waste District's MRF. So that's how our drop-off sites manage that material. We send it to the Chittenden Solid Waste facility. And so I think the bottle bill in large is, it is, as one of the previous witnesses said, a form of extended producer responsibility, but it's narrow in that scope, and it just covers a portion of the waste stream, and it is a separate system. So it really doesn't have anything to do with what we collect, other than if it is expanded, it'll move some packaging items out of the blue bin, or what comes to our drop-off facilities, or the curbside system, into that bottle deposit system.
And have you estimated, if the bill were to be passed in its current form, what percentage of materials that you currently receive would no longer come to you? What's the impact operationally and financially?
Yeah, I can't accurately assess that right now, but I can anecdotally say that wine bottles currently make up a fair proportion of our waste stream. So that would be a reduction. I would say it would be in the 25% range. But again, that's not through any accurate study of our waste stream, and by parsing out, the different materials that would be added. I think Chittenden solid waste would be a better, and Casella, they would be better to speak to what percentage that would be. And that would be there. So as was pointed out, I think there's pluses and minuses to an expanded bottle bill. There's definitely an efficiency, and the separation that's created at the redemption center creates a higher quality material, particularly for the glass, which makes it more marketable. As I've heard from those who run material recovery facilities, that the loss of material in general would probably be a revenue reduction to them. And as somebody who brings our materials to them, I could see that would mean that fees would go up to compensate for that. And that's something that is of note for us.
Okay, so just so we understand your operation,
Yep.
Do you receive any revenues from the single source stream that you move on to Chittenden? Do they somehow say, okay, well, there's value in that stream and we're going to pay you something for it, or is it a cost to you?
Right. So our general system at in the Northwest District is we have a dual stream. We process the fibers, so cardboard and paper, from all of our drop-off sites ourselves, and then we send all of our commingled containers to the MRF. We do not receive revenue for the commingled containers. The CSWD has it's a blended average. So all the material that comes into their facility, they know some are costs, some have revenues. There's a cost to the labor, obviously, and infrastructure. And then when all of the revenues and costs are accounted for, they have a tip fee that they set based on that. And so we actually pay a tip fee for our commingled containers. So we're currently paying, we're not receiving any revenue for those items.
Okay.
Yeah, we do receive revenue, as the previous witness said, for our fibers, so cardboard and mixed paper. And it was correctly noted that the fiber markets are relatively high right now, and but they do fluctuate, and as all the commodity markets fluctuate, a big factor is the economy, and when the economy is suffering, consumption is down, and therefore the commodity prices are also down. So it's not really static. I've seen commodity prices for mixed paper and cardboard at zero in the last 15 years. And I've seen them, before at highs that are near where they're at today. So there is fluctuation in the longer term.
Sure. So what's your sense of, Ms. Gallagher-Leapberg was relatively comfortable saying that it looked like prices for fiber and mixed paper would stay relatively high for some extended period of time. I don't know what your forecast tells you.
I think the span on how the markets for fibers fluctuate is, I think, a bit longer, but I think we can't say for sure that they're going to stay steady at the 160 to 180 a ton range that they're currently in. As long there's a great demand in terms of consumer packaging and shipping materials that causes the cost, especially for cardboard, to be high. If we see a significant economic downturn and people's spending habits change and they're not purchasing as much from Amazon, that demand's going to shrink rapidly. So.
And the high fiber prices, what's the impact on your operation? I mean, are you basically an expense for the municipalities that contribute? I'm just trying to understand the business model a little better. Like, does this put you in the black to have a high fiber price? Or is it just reduce the amount of, put you less in the red, I guess?
I think when collection and infrastructure and then disposal of and paying the tip fee at the MRF for the other items, the revenue we receive for fiber definitely helps balance the balance sheet for us. I would not say we sway too far into the black when prices are high like this, especially when things like the cost of labor and fuel is up. So.
Okay. And can you say, do you know the tipping fee for commingled versus the tipping fee for trash?
Yeah. So when we tip directly at the material recovery facility in Williston, our tipping fee is $65 a ton, I believe. The tipping fee for trash, ours is currently $130 a ton.
Thank you.
Yep. Now, when we tip, some of our remote facilities are closer to a transfer station that accepts recycling than it is to the material recovery facility. And so we do sometimes tip those commingled containers at a transfer station, and the costs at the transfer station are closer to the trash price. It's in the same, and that's to account for increased transportation.
Right. Are there? So it sounds as though, relatively speaking, you're something like neutral on the bill.
Yeah, I think that's a good characterization. I'm a big proponent of extended producer responsibility. I think that as a manager of all waste, everything that is produced and sold in our economy is contributing to the problem. And so if producers and those that are making money on goods that are sold into the economy are made responsible for their waste at the end, then we'll have a better system in general. And so I think that, when you add not just the cardboard and paper, which are highly recyclable, but also items that don't fall under all, the beverage systems that are proposed. So I think when all packaging is figured in, then it'll be an even playing field. But as for the bill that's in front of us now, I think I'm relatively neutral on it. I think there's benefits to it, and as well as some things that have me cautious in my approach.
Right, and the main one in terms of having you cautious is if a MRF loses a valuable, a portion of the stream they're currently receiving that has value in the recyclables market, then that may cause them to increase tipping fees in order to compensate. Am I right that I heard that?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Any sort of wish list items as you look at the bill? You say, well, here's a problem we face, and it's related to this. I wish you would consider taking that on.
Well, I'll just speak to something that I've heard from other solid waste districts who may be on the the witness list later, who operate redemption programs, and that is the issue of the handling fee. And I've also noticed, the reduction in redemption centers around the state, and note that when you make a system less convenient by having less opportunities to participate in it, then that makes it less effective and people aren't going to use it as frequently. So I think making sure that redemption centers stay in business so that people can use that system to its most efficient ends, then the system is a winner.
Yeah. I mean, I think based on, so one thing I want to do is a slight aside. S-236, the EPR bill on our wall, one of the chief contributors to that and sort of editor-in-chief of the working group was Mr. Letty. So I'm sorry that we have been unable to take up that bill this session, but that work won't go to waste. So it
No
was
pun intended.
too big a lift for the amount of time we have in year 2 of the biennium. And it's definitely something we want to do right.
Right. Well, I understand your committee has been extremely busy, and I thank you for having me in today.
Okay. Well, thanks. And your point is, it's also a concern to us, the whole notion of losing possible redemption centers. And I don't know to what degree the handling fee might be, even if adjusted by a penny, for instance, might change the economics of it enough to interest other people in coming in. And what it reminds me of a little bit is when we talked about picking up food residuals, people said, well, this is going to be very problematic. And yet new businesses arose when they saw an opportunity to run profitable business on it. And so there may be the same opportunity here. We have to learn more. Yeah. Okay. Well, great. Any committee questions for Mr. Letty? Well, thank you for your patience and thanks for your testimony. Good to see you again.
All right. Good to see you all too. Thank you very much. Bye.
With that, Mr. Tomasi is our next listed guest. And oh, I see him there. The NEK badge. Good morning, Mr. Tomasi.
Good morning.
Are we going to see your picture or are you staying?
Well,
either way works.
Let's not put pressure on witnesses.
I'm not sure why the video didn't start up automatically, but
Whatever you're.
there we go.
There you are.
All right.
Good to see you. Thanks for joining us this morning.
With my-
So you've heard some of the conversation, and we're looking at H-175 and checking in at this point with solid waste districts just to see how this would impact the logistics that you manage, as well as the possible financial impacts. And then if you have suggestions around the bill, how it might be improved, we're interested in hearing those too.
Sure. So my name's Paul Tomasi. I'm the executive director of the Northeast Kingdom Waste Management District based in Lyndonville, Vermont. We have 49 member towns scattered throughout 5 counties, primarily Essex, Orleans, and Caledonia, but a few in Washington and Orange. We service 28 facilities, meaning that we're actively involved in picking up materials from a number of our member towns. Unlike the Northwest District that you just heard from, things in our district work a little differently. Our towns are responsible for contracts involving solid waste directly with haulers and the landfills in our area. And we primarily focus on recycling. We do collect, process, and market all of our own materials. So unlike what you just heard from Mr. Letty, we do feel the fluctuations in market conditions directly. And I will say that 2021 was probably one of our most successful years from a revenue standpoint because of the surge in commodity prices. I know that in listening to Mr. Letty's testimony, there was some discussion about, being in the black or the red. While it was a successful year for us, I guess I would caution this committee to believe that collecting, processing, marketing recyclables is a profit-making endeavor under any financial circumstances. I think there are always costs associated with it, and our jobs as solid waste managers are to minimize those costs. So while we were successful last year in generating a surplus, in comparison to what we budgeted, I'd hesitate to say that we ran in the black, because there are always costs associated with picking up materials. Now, that said, we did collect 272 tons of glass in calendar year 2021. Our glass is shipped to All Metals Recycling in Hardwick. It's consolidated there and then shipped eventually to a company in Quebec called 3MR, where it's processed and made into fiberglass. The costs associated with that are almost as high or as high for any other material that we handle, including tires. Actually, tires are a little bit more expensive to handle, but glass costs us about $75 a ton once it's all said and done. There's a processing fee, there's some hauling fees in there. And I know that several years ago, this very same committee took testimony, and it was believed at the time that wine bottles represented a small fraction of the overall glass waste stream. And as Mr. Leddy mentioned, I think he said around 25%. I was caught off guard by the comments made by the wine industry at the time. So when I came back and looked into it, I actually pulled aside glass from two towns, Morgan and Cabot, and I sorted the glass myself and discovered that just based on those two towns alone, we were looking at between 40 and 60% of our glass being wine bottles, which is far more than the fraction indicated by the wine industry lobby. So I first and foremost would like to emphasize that glass, wine bottles in particular, are a significant contributor to the glass waste stream. And as far as our overall costs go, I know a number of things like water bottles would be added with this bill. We do process our own plastics, but again, that comes at a cost, even though we do generate revenue, and plastics have produced a fairly steady and valuable resource or revenue stream for us. I would welcome adding more materials to the bottle bill so that we wouldn't have to handle them, especially the wine bottles and other glass containers. So I think that's about all I have to say on the subject, unless there are any questions. I know you did ask if there were other things that we'd like to see, and in talking with other colleagues of mine who do run redemption centers, as Mr. Leddy mentioned, increase in the handling fees, not only for the non-commingled containers, but also the commingled containers.
And is that, and what's the reason? Are you concerned, for instance, Senator Westman has brought up a case where there's someone who's thinking about if the amount of material flowing through his small store is increased by the bottle bill, that might be just too much. So I think one of our concerns is to make sure that it's affordable for people to handle an increased load. I've also heard, though, Redemption Center, that they feel like they could take it in stride and they just see it as a way to grow their business. So they're not worried about the figures.
Yeah, and I think as Mr. Leddy alluded to, compensation for processing the materials is only going to make it more attractive. And while some redemption centers may be able to absorb the increased volume, I think the volume of water bottles alone would be or could be overwhelming. But not having any skin in the game as far as a redemption center goes, I can't really speak to that. And maybe that's one thing that I don't know. I haven't looked at the entire list of witnesses, but maybe having some redemption center folks testify would be helpful.
Yeah, thanks for that. We just got a name this morning, and there's someone else, so we definitely want to check in on the front lines to make sure there's not some unintended consequences. So it's interesting to me, you surprised me a little, honestly, when you said, you wouldn't mind not having some of the materials that this new, that H-175 would redirect away from your facility, because I've in the last few years heard the stories. Chicken solid waste is probably the best example of, if you remove PET or some PET plastic from our stream, you'll decrease our ability to resell it in the recyclables marketplace. Therefore, our costs will have to charge a higher tipping fee because we're going to lose a revenue stream. So do you operate in a different model so that you're not facing that pressure?
No, I think we probably operate in a similar model, but increased volume doesn't necessarily increase our efficiency. Now, so that might be where our models differ. I think the Chittenden Solid Waste District is receiving materials brought to their facility, and we're actually engaged in going out and picking those materials up and bringing them back ourselves. So we do face a different set of costs as far as transportation goes. And I haven't been able, I couldn't sit here and tell you what percentage water bottles or other proposed inclusions in the bottle bill are a percentage of our plastics waste stream. My guess is it's very significant and may reach as much as 40 or 50%. What I can tell you is the glass is expensive for us to process, and if we can remove 50% of that, it probably would offset any revenue we get from plastic. And I think Mr. Letty alluded to this as well, fibers, cardboard and mixed paper represent about 50% of all materials that we process. Plastics are probably around 15 or 20%. So, and it's kind of a tricky material for us to manage from a logistical standpoint. So yeah, maybe we do face slightly different economics as far as collection and processing goes, but I think that's something, like I said earlier, there are costs associated with this, and from our perspective, the less we have to pick up and process, I think the better our overall economic picture looks.
Sure. And, just by way of reassurance, that when I was talking about running into red versus the black, we know the entire operation is always a cost. We're dealing with waste, and it's just sort of, but we also want to be mindful of, if we're adjusting the system, that we don't put any operation into a bad position by really changing the economics of their operation. So,
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
And
Okay.
Just to kind of agree with Mr. Letty, we're fairly neutral on this, but I guess maybe more on the positive side of supporting this because of the impact it would have on the glass waste stream in particular. We're supportive of removing the wine bottles from our system.
The glass stream that you have is coming out of basically when you're picking up is a single sort that's what's coming to you and you're sorting, or?
No,
Or,
our district operates, and I'm glad you brought that up. We're probably one of the only waste districts where we require source separation at the point of generation. So our membership provides that labor of sorting their own materials at the facilities located in their town.
yeah, sort of the old fashioned way where
Yes.
people used to show
Yeah,
up
the
and
old-
sort into the things.
Yeah.
Okay, so even though you're getting clean glass, I was trying to distinguish whether you're shipping to Quebec ultimately clean glass or contaminated glass, if that's one way of categorizing it. And it sounds like even though you got clean sorted glass, it's still expensive.
Yes, yeah, and I think that's a point to emphasize. Our glass is very clean. And yet it still costs us about $75 a ton to get it to Quebec.
Yeah.
Now I've heard rumors that there will be other processes of glass, probably closer to us, but I've been in this position for 23 years, and I've heard a number of stories of glass processors coming online, and none of them have come to fruition. So just thought I'd mention that.
Your history on that one is longer than ours, but it's the same sort of disappointing story so far. Always on the horizon that we're going to have a better use, closer at hand, that will reduce costs to the system. So, okay. All right. Well, good to see you again, and thanks very much for your testimony.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. With that, we'll go to Mr. Noel. I don't know if I'm pronouncing your last name correctly or not. Is it like the holiday or?
It is like the holiday. You can't imagine how happy that made me that you got the last name correct, Senator. Surprisingly, a lot of people get wrong.
Okay. So good morning. Thanks for joining us. You know the bill we're discussing and the kind of conversation we're having. There's lots of pieces, and Congress actually an important piece of the total system. Be interested to hear what your thoughts are on H-175 and any opportunities for improvement that we might also consider while we're taking on H-175.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thanks for having me. Is it okay if I share my screen?
Yes, we'll make you a host momentarily.
All right, beautiful. While we're doing that, I'll just introduce myself. My name is Mike Noel. Everybody, I am the Public Affairs Director for TAMRA, North America. We are an international recycling innovation company with operations in over 80 countries around the world. And yes, thanks for inviting me to speak today, because we're a big part of the deposit system in Vermont, as well as the Northeast and around the world. So happy to talk about the changes today. Feel free to jump in with questions as well. Can you all see the screen?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. So first I'll give you an introduction to TAMRA so you understand who we are and where we're coming from. I can do an overview of the key functions of deposit refund systems, as we call them, or bottle bills as they're known. The key principles and elements of high performing deposit systems, both so we can widen the scope to not just Vermont system, but around the world. And some comments on the implementation of H-175 I think might be helpful for this committee as you really understand the pros and cons to different approaches. Happy to talk about that. So for TAMRA, so just so you understand, we are active in every link of the deposit value chain. Some folks know us as the providers of reverse vending machines to retailers or redemption centers. These are machines which automate the container deposit redemption process. We have a service team to service them. We provide the data administration and clearing of handling fees and deposits on the back end of the system. We're the primary pickup agent for picking up the containers from redemption centers and retailers throughout the state, as well as most of New England. We also operate a number of processing facilities, which basically sorts out and cleans the deposit containers further before selling them back to the market. And we do that brokerage on behalf of, we do all this on behalf of the beverage industry as kind of a compliance service. We have an Essex facility, which does the processing for the majority of the material in Vermont. And the remainder is shipped to New York. Timer has over 5 decades of experience in deposit refund systems, and we are active in every major global deposit market. There's about 40 in the world today. That includes, we are involved in Germany, Norway, Michigan, Oregon, etc. And I guess maybe just to start to understand like why are bottle bills in place, there's 2 key functions. Sometimes there's a perception that the, say, non-deposit curbside system is the same as the bottle bill system. That's not quite accurate for 2 reasons. One is deposit systems generate higher collection rates for recycling. So this is Vermont specific data. Last year, I believe it was Casella that testified they believe the recycling rate to be around 40% for the non-deposit system. I think it was DEC's report from 2018 that put that figure closer to 67%, although I know that number is in dispute. Maybe some other experts will testify on that. But even if that is the figure, the deposit system in Vermont is still collecting a higher percentage of containers. So the 77% figure is for non-liquor deposit containers, those at 5 cents. There's a higher deposit on liquor containers in Vermont, and the collection rate there is 83%. And then finally, the 2 states with a flat 10-cent deposit have a redemption rate around or an average of 88%. So it's this financial value and this financial incentive for the public to participate that separates, say, the curbside system from the refund system. And by the way, that jump between 67 and 77% is not trivial. When you look at the difference there in the number of containers sold these days, the difference in the deposit, just in those beverage categories that have a deposit now, the difference between 67 and 77% is 27 million containers. That's 27 million containers that are recycled at a high quality. If we add in the expansion categories proposed in this bill, and the redemption rates stay the same, 67 and 77%, that difference jumps to 62 million containers. So it's not a trivial amount here, especially when the goal is to reduce litter. The next big difference here is, as you've heard, that the quality of the material collected in the deposit system is of a higher quality. And this is, at least when you compare it with the single stream situation, these images show glass when it's collected in a single stream recycling operation versus the deposit system. The reasons why it's higher quality is simply that it's kept clean and it's separated by material type. This in turn creates a higher market value for the material. There's been some question about the economics of the commodities collected in the deposit system, so I can share more about that here. So of the glass collected, as I understand it, Chittenden Solid Waste pays to get rid of glass at $5 a ton, where it is downcycled rather than recycled into new bottles. The bottle bill is when glass is collected, it is valued at around $20 a ton. So there's clearly a revenue differential there. That's because glass processors are interested in this high quality material. For PET, there's a similar story. It's not well known, but generally deposit PET bales are 40% more valuable than curbside PET bales, but they have been reported as much as 93% higher, according to recyclingmarkets.net, which is essentially categorizes commodity values. At least in 2020, but generally that figure is more about 40%. And that's because PET reclaimers view this as, and manufacturers view this material as having a higher quality. They have to deal with less contamination. They also get a higher process yield, meaning of the material they take in, they can actually utilize a higher percentage of it. For aluminum, it's a bit more of a wash, but because it really depends on the equipment at your, curbside recycling MRF. But Novelis, who is a major recycler and aluminum manufacturer, says that they do focus their contracts and typically higher prices towards deposit material, meaning they'll pay a premium for deposit material. The reasons being consistent flow, level of cleanliness, and level of quality. So there's a higher quality of material in a deposit system. If we zoom out, this shows all of the deposit systems in existence today. There's about 40. As you can see, they're not, this shows their redemption rates or their collection rates. This is, as you can see, there's a difference of performance. Vermont's kind of in the bottom quartile here. Previously, you were in the 90% range, so you were in the green, but it has dropped to the reds now. And since Tomer is involved in the majority of these systems, and we saw a growing interest in deposit systems, about 2 years ago, we initiated a project to really understand why are some container deposit return systems succeeding while others are failing. And in general, we see the high performing systems, those that are collecting around 90% and higher, generally share these 4 principles in common. First is performance. There's a performance target set and a meaningful deposit value to engage the public on a wide scope of beverages. The second is convenience. So if you're going to place a deposit on a container, you need to make it easy, accessible, and fair for everyone. And these high performing systems do that, you typically through retailers, but occasionally by adding a redemption center network as well. And producer responsibility. These are extended producer responsibility programs after all. So producers finance and manage the system within a framework set by the government, and they're able to invest in the program with the revenue generated by the system, primarily with the unredeemed deposits. I know that's not how Vermont's system operates today. It goes to clean water, but these other systems in the world, that is a best practice. And finally is system integrity. So trust and transparency are built into the high performing systems, primarily through product registration, data management, a clearinghouse, and redemption specifications or protocols. Any questions about this before I go into more specifics on H175?
No, that's very helpful. It's great that you have this broader experience. And it's too bad that Vermont is has slipped backwards on your chart.
Sure.
Certainly something we want to see if we can remedy, at least in part through the bill.
Great. Yeah, and we want to see the system succeed as well. On some comments about the implementation, I think these are concerns you're likely to hear, and I can share how they're done today and elsewhere. So first, just a general overview of Vermont's deposit refund system. In some ways it's unique, in some ways it's similar, but today producers meet their legal obligations directly. The law sets the framework. You charge a deposit, pay a handling fee, pick up your containers, and producers today have the freedom to meet those requirements as they see fit and to optimize the costs as they see fit. Over time, they've come up with a couple innovations to make this a more efficient process. You've heard about the commingling groups. Automation has been adopted at most chain grocers as by choice for those locations. And then, of course, the pickup and processing are consolidated. So the redemption network is retailers and redemption centers. Independent redemption centers are authorized to create that small business opportunity for those who want to take back cans and bottles as a business. The commingled containers today make up 85% of all deposit containers sold. The pickup operation, Tamara is the primary pickup agent. I believe we are the only pickup provider in the state, picking up for all distributors. And this helps us achieve economies of scale. So it's one truck going to each location as opposed to one for each distributor, and the extra fuel and greenhouse gas emissions that would create. This also enables us to offer a low-cost service for the producers.
I do have a question on that one about pickup. I was talking to a redemption center, and they said they're interested in expanding, what they redeem through, as outlined in the bill. they were a little concerned about the timing in terms of terminal pickups, that they weren't sure they were gonna have the capacity to hold all the material before their next scheduled pickup. Have you looked at, I don't know, bringing out more trucks, adjusting route schedules, et cetera, if this bill were to pass?
Yeah, you read my mind. That's actually on the next slide where we anticipate, of course, if this bill were to pass, we're adding more volume to the system. That's going to be more volume and for some locations, more space than they have if we just keep the pickup operation exactly as is today. And we've looked at that and we're saying we're going to need to pick up frequency of pickups for certain locations. There's no doubt. So that's just going to be a function of transitioning to a more modernized system.
The reverse vending machines that I think I've mostly seen them just at grocery stores. Do you folks operate them? They're just placed there, or does the Hannaford's run the ones that are Hannaford's?
So we provide the technology and the service for the machine. So should they have an issue or a technological issue, we have a team that we can send out. The store or the redemption center themselves actually empties the machine there, and we provide them with maintenance protocols too, like cleaning the machines periodically.
Okay. And you were talking about convenience. Do you have any plans to place these machines at more locations?
I'm sure our sales team would wish to send more reverse vending machines to more locations. So that's really a decision by the redemption centers, and the retailers, whether they want to transition to technology or whether they want to continue taking containers over the counter or manually. If the state wants to get involved, Connecticut has updated their bottle bill this past year. And what they decided, they had some concern over whether the public had access to redeem their deposit money. And so what they did was, New York has done something similar where they required reverse vending machines at stores that are over 7,000 square feet, chain stores, I should say. You need to have 10 locations or more in the state to be eligible. And those stores are now providing 2 RVMs at all locations above that square footage.
Okay, great. Well, that's interesting. I was going to ask you if there was a volume requirement. If you sell more than X amount of these containers, that triggers the obligation to provide an RVM or something like that. Okay.
Sure, there's that. And I should point out, because you're talking about the volume, for the vast majority of redemption locations in Vermont, a reverse vending machine is, how should we say, financially accessible. Due to the handling fee that they get from that level of volume and the level of labor savings they would have by automating redemption versus doing it manually, these machines are quite affordable. They're not necessarily out of reach for a majority of locations in Vermont today.
So sorry, the last thing I didn't, when you place an RVM, for instance, at a supermarket, does that supermarket pay to have you place that machine there?
They do. They pay. They pay for it, and that's kind of the purpose of the handling fee, in a way, that they cover the cost of accepting the containers. The distributor picks it up, but the handling fee is intended to help cover these redemption costs. Retailers are the ones selling the packaging, so in some ways they share in the cost of redemption of that packaging waste.
Thank you.
It's a double reverse machine.
And then, should I continue?
Yes, please.
Okay, and then just to round this out, so the pickup is consolidated, as well as the processing. TAMRA is the main processing provider for the containers, both in Essex and New York. This slide, I think we can skip. This is just to say that we understand that space is a concern for some locations. The affordability of RVMs, the increase of pickup services, we think will help with this. Also, of course, the bill raises the handling fee on non-commingled products. which I think is the intent of DEC, who helped propose that measure. I think the intent is to increase the number of commingling groups and reduce the sorts, which of course reduces the space required for redemption. Another topic that comes up is unauthorized cross-border redemption. I think we should spend just a second talking about this. So this is how cross-border unauthorized redemption is managed today. So RVMs we're capable of remotely monitoring redemption behavior when something is redeemed in an RVM. And so we have triggers set up. So if someone is doing some sort of unusual redemption behavior, someone's redeeming 7,000 coronal lights at 6 a.m. So in a border town, they're like, okay, that looks like a suspicious incident. Let's go investigate. And so we can do that. We have that capability today. Of course, that it would help if there were more RVMs throughout the state, so we have better visibility, but that's what it is in the automation side of the system. Another step we use for those containers that are redeemed manually is what we call sampling. So our driver will come to the store, they will tag 10% of each package type at that redemption location. Basically, we note the date, the location, the container size, and the material type of that bag. We take it back to our processing facility and run it through a bulk redemption machine, which basically verifies that count. And it checks the count of those containers versus what the redemption provider said it was. And so this is kind of a check on making sure that we're not seeing large amounts of containers come in, and it's a flag for us to investigate locations should we see suspicious behavior. And then another step that the commingling group that producers have taken on themselves is monthly visual audits for manual redemption locations. So the commingling group performs monthly audits of select redemption locations, think of a border town. And what they do is they look to make sure that the container has a Vermont 5 cents marking on it. They only pay for this for cans only. I guess that's how they've chosen to prioritize their unauthorized redemption protocols, but that's the way it works today. Now, there are opportunities to strengthen this. There are opportunities to take this a step further should there be feel like there's a need from producers to solve this situation. So some of the opportunities, there is technology available in the European systems where producers have organized to prioritize this. This type of issue is not a big problem. They provide, it requires a transition and investment, but it is not generally talked about there. The solutions they use are state-specific markings and barcodes, meaning unique add-on barcodes on deposit containers. When they're going through an RVM, if we have that information, we can reject all the other containers that do not have that marking. For manually locations, you can place a visual marking on there like Poland Spring has done here that says this is a deposit container or not a deposit container. So those locations can reject them when verifying. Taking it a further step, you could mandate that there's some sort of manual redemption protocols. For example, some Canadian systems have and European systems have all manually redeemed containers go to a secondary counting center where every container is verified again against the count of the redemption location. So it's another step in the process. And then finally, rather than the legislature kind of dictating what the solution should be, this is, you could have some sort of enabling legislation to have producers come to their own preferred solution. Here's what we think the cost is today of the status quo. Here's the solutions on the table, how other systems have managed it. Here's how we should go forward as an industry. So I guess I would just want to emphasize that there's options out there. It does require some investment in looking into, but you also need to balance that versus the status quo. My final comments were just about the importance of container size limits. You had asked about, a wish list, Senator. Our interest is really just making sure if this goes through, we need to make sure it works for everybody. So we do recommend size limits. I can submit language if that's helpful. And then finally, product registration. I believe VPERG referenced this, but in order for the public to get their deposit money back, we need a universal product code on each container, which the vast majority of producers these days already have. And we need that information shared with us so that the machines can have that information in the system and the redemption can be initiated back to them.
Yeah, if you could, so thanks very much. If you could send along any language suggestions you have, it'll help us consider them as we continue our work on the bill. This is only really day one on the bill.
Okay, excellent. I can do that.
So thank you very much. Any committee questions for Mr. Noel? Senator McDonald?
No, I see a lot of these things being presented to us. This one seemed to anticipate the questions that we might want to ask before we asked them, and gave visual and comparative. You told us it was a terrific presentation.
Thank you.
It seemed to be what we were looking for, and not what the witnesses wanted to convince us of. Thank you.
Okay. Well, Senator McCormick.
Are the producers, you mentioned the producers are paying something presumably through the sellers. Are the people on the selling end, either producers or sellers, does it add up to their fair share? Or are the taxpayers still subsidizing them and the customers subsidizing them?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure if I follow the question. Are producers paying for, what was the question?
Disposal of what ultimately they produced and sold. Okay, you go and you buy a beverage in a bottle, you pay for it, and the money's going to the seller, and a lot of that is going back to the producer. That's why they're in business. And then you have to, now you've got an empty bottle you got to deal with. And you give it to society. Society has an empty bottle they got to deal with. And it costs money. We get some money from selling it. It's not always profitable. And there's still handling fees and so on. Have the people who actually profited off of creating the problem paid their fair share of the cost of dealing with the problem they created?
That's a good question. I haven't done the analysis on the cost of waste disposal in the state and shipping out to landfills or incineration in some other states. I think what we're talking about is the nature of extended producer responsibility. And that's essentially what the bottle bill is tasking producers with taking responsibility for the packaging they create. And the bottle bill is different from the EPR for packaging proposals that are coming to many state houses these days, because what separates it is the deposit value. So it's not just that producers are covering the cost of the existing curbside recycling system, but there's actually an incentive for the public to bring those containers back. So we see higher collection rates and higher recycling rates in bottle deposit systems than we do in EPR for packaging systems.
Now, I understand the argument that producers and sellers make, which is when the consumer buys the product, they've also bought the container. So now it's your problem. Like when you buy a piece of property, you bought its liabilities as well as its assets. And now you've got to deal with it. But not everyone buys the argument. Okay. The argument is that
Yes.
if you put this out and you're collecting money for it, there's a problem that the world has to deal with. And your relationship to it as a manufacturer is mainly taking the money, you take the money and run. So, okay, one way or another, have we structured this not to punish people, they got a right to make a living, but have we made sure that they are paying their fair share?
I think a good metric is the redemption rate. You know, if the bottle bill is structured to collect as many of the beverage industry's packaging as possible and to recycle it, and I think you can look at the redemption rate as a metric of that. We're at 77% in Vermont now. Other states are lower. Some states have achieved higher, especially in Europe. And when the container is not collected, the producer does not pay a handling fee. So, but when it is collected, they do pay a handling fee. So I think that factors into, you know, your analysis of whether the industry is covering, you know, the full cost or not.
I won't keep pushing this here and now. I think in this discussion, I want to continue to revisit that question, Mr. Chairman, all right? Because the way I look at it, if I buy something and I pay the deposit and then I turn it in and I get the deposit back, all I've gotten back is my own money. That deposit is a guarantee that I'm going to take proper care of the container. And once I bring it back and I take the money and run, society has a problem. And yes, the manufacturer has to pay something. I just want to make sure that they're paying their fair share, that it's enough. Because I think the taxpayers right now provide a lot of manufacturers with what is essentially a subsidy.
Well, if you have time for extra reading, S236 might be of interest to you because, again, we didn't have time to take on full EPR, but that addresses the very question you're raising more squarely. You know, this is kind of, we get at it from the side a little bit, but EPR goes directly at it. Well, again, thanks very much, Mr. Noel. And where are you located, by the way?
I am based in Connecticut, where our North American headquarters are.
Where in Connecticut?
Shelton, Connecticut.
Is that down by the shore?
It's about 20-ish minutes from the shore, yes.
Well, probably a little chilly for swimming today anyway. All right, but maybe tomorrow it's going to be warm. So thanks again for coming in. And with that, I'd like to say hello to Ms. Crosby. Thanks for joining us again.
Thank
Morning.
you.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Nice to see you. So
Good to see you too.
you know this issue inside out backwards. So take it away.
Okay, thanks. So thank you for providing me with the opportunity to provide testimony on H175. For the record, my name is Kim Crosby. I'm the Environmental Compliance Manager for Casella Waste Systems, a Vermont-based company providing solid waste and recycling services in Vermont since 1975. Casella operates the recycling facility in Williston under a contract with the Chittenden County Solid Waste District and owns and operates the other recycling facility located in Rutland. Casella does not support expansion of the bottle bill redemption system as proposed in H175. We view bottle bills as antiquated legacy systems that were originally designed to control litter and promote recycling at a time when recycling programs were less common or not mandatory. In 2012, the legislature unanimously passed the Universal Recycling Law, mandating all Vermonters recycle and banned recyclables from disposal. In addition to mandating all Vermonters recycle, the law requires all solid waste facilities provide for the collection of recyclables and all solid waste haulers provide curbside recycling services. Vermont is one out of 2 states to adopt such a comprehensive recycling law. Delaware also passed a universal recycling law. However, after passing their law, they subsequently repealed their bottle bill. Issues with fraud accompanied by a structurally flawed system ultimately led to the state's decision to eliminate their bill. The most efficient and economical way for solid waste haulers to provide mandatory curbside recycling service is through single stream collection. Single stream is also the most convenient option for Vermonters, and convenience was deemed as one of the most important factors in encouraging Vermonters to recycle more and throw away less. Many investments were made on behalf of the public and the private sector to implement the law and help Vermont achieve its recycling and diversion goals. The 2021 Biennial Report on Solid Waste, prepared by the Department of Environmental Conservation for the House and Senate Committees on Natural Resources, indicates that the universal recycling law is working. Vermonters are recycling 72% of mandated recyclables, and the state has seen a 10% increase in recycling since 2014. Another indication of success is the low contamination rate we are seeing at both recycling facilities. The contamination rate, which is the amount of material that people place in their recycling bins that isn't recyclable, ranges between 7 to 11% compared to 20 to 25% in other states throughout the country. We believe the contamination rate will continue to improve over time through the continuous education provided by haulers, municipalities, solid waste districts, and the Department of Environmental Conservation on what can and cannot be recycled. Bottle bills also compete with and threaten the economic viability of recycling facilities as they skim off a sizable portion of the recycling stream. A recent study prepared by Resource Recycling Systems, released last month by the National Waste and Recycling Association, evaluated the impact of bottle bill systems on MRFs, the recycling facility, and municipalities. The study concluded bottle bills and expanded bottle bills lead to higher costs and lower revenues when high-value materials such as PET and aluminum are moved away from the MRF. In a bottle bill system, the fixed cost per ton increases because total fixed cost remains constant and have to be spread across fewer tons received. This is consistent with an internal evaluation we conducted at our facilities using the scenario proposed in H175. Our evaluation concluded we would have to increase our tip fee by approximately 11% per ton. The increase in tipping fees at MRFs would be passed on to solid waste haulers, who in turn would be passed on to their customers. That means any increase would be passed on to municipalities, solid waste districts, colleges, schools, healthcare facilities, restaurants, businesses, and most concerningly, residents, all of whom are required to recycle by law, and many of whom are already suffering financially from ongoing labor shortages, increasing fuel prices, supply chain issues, soaring grocery prices, and other financial impacts related to COVID-19, accompanied by the rising cost of inflation. Many municipalities have expressed concern with costs associated with recycling. To reduce the burden of increasing costs, municipalities are favoring extended producer responsibility programs on packaging and printed materials as introduced by S236. Extended producer responsibility on packaging is proposing to shift the cost for collecting and managing recycling from municipalities back to the producers. Passing legislation like H175 that would increase the cost of recycling seems counterintuitive to the municipally favored EPR model and recent legislative initiatives. In addition, in 2019, I served on the single-use product working group chaired by Senator Bray. Representative McCullough, who introduced H175, was also a member. As members, we were asked to submit our top 3 priorities we wanted to see added to the final report that was distributed to the Vermont General Assembly. One of Representative McCullough's priorities was to focus on EPR and eliminate the bottle bill. While Casella does not support eliminating the existing bottle bill, we believe the focus should be on hard to manage unrecyclable materials and not materials already recycled under the current systems. Cost associated with transportation of these materials is also an issue, and particularly the cost associated with glass. The biggest cost associated with recycling glass is not the processing cost, but the cost of transportation. Glass is heavy, and the heavier a material is, the more it costs to transport. In addition, greenhouse gas emissions associated with the transport of glass is already an issue, as most, if not all, glass is transported out of state. Glass currently collected under the bottle bill system is transported by tractor trailer several hundred miles to out-of-state facilities and processed into fiberglass or bottle-to-bottle materials. Casella sends glass from our Rutland facility by rail to Strategic Materials, which is a beneficiation facility located in North Carolina that processes glass in the same way. Vermont needs local solutions for managing our glass. Transporting glass hundreds of miles by rail or tractor trailer is not conducive or in line with the goals outlined in the Global Warming Solutions Act. Glass can be broken, crushed, or pulverized and used for various types of construction materials, including replacement for virgin sand and road construction projects. VTrans testified last year that Vermont is experiencing a sand shortage and will need to import sand as there are no new sand pits being developed to meet the existing and future needs for sand. VTrans has indicated that they can use all the glass that both MRFs can produce. It is important to note that recycling isn't just about diverting material away from disposal, it's also about conserving our natural resources. In addition, moving material that is already being collected and recycled from the MRF to the bottle bill system means that more trucks will be needed to keep up with the additional material that would be brought to redemption centers and retail locations. Many retailers do not have the room or the labor to accommodate the additional volume. With the focus on climate change, we should be evaluating ways to improve collection efficiencies by reducing the number of trucks on the road, not increasing them. Testimony from DSM presented before the House last year explained that expanding the bottle bill will only capture an additional 4,000 tons of material, which equates to diverting an additional 1% of material from disposal. DSM also stated that expansion would increase the cost of operating the bottle bill by $4 million and concurred that expansion will increase the cost of the products it is proposing to target and at the same time increase the cost of recycling for all Vermonters. This seems like a pretty heavy price tag for an effort that isn't going to move the needle that much. DSM has conducted several studies on Vermont's bottle bill system on behalf of the Agency of Natural Resources and would strongly recommend that the committee invite them in to testify. In closing, we urge the committee to support Vermont's recycling infrastructure by not supporting H175 as proposed. Now is not the time to be considering legislation that would place additional financial strain on Vermonters by increasing the cost of recycling and consumer prices. As always, we welcome any member of the committee to visit either of our recycling facilities to show you the hard work that is involved in managing Vermonters' recyclables. And just thank you for the opportunity to come in and testify, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions from the committee?
I'm sorry, I was in Senate Ed for the past.
Right.
Sorry.
Thank you.
How's that?
The Ms. Crosby, you referenced a couple of reports, a DEC report and a DSM study. Are those listed or linked to your submitted testimony?
They're not, but I can submit my written testimony to Jude, but I can provide the links to those reports. It would be on DEC's website.
Okay, thanks. We'll be looping back to DEC, of course, but thank you for the heads up.
Sure.
So I do have a question about VTrans and processed glass aggregate. So
Yep.
this has been frustratingly on the cusp of being approved for maybe 3 years running now.
I agree.
And is it, so we haven't got to signing on the dotted line that processed glass aggregate out of your facilities is now a material that meets some spec and can be used for roadbed?
So just to be clear, CSWD has the glass crusher. So we're not making processed glass aggregate in Rutland. We don't have that equipment. Only CSWD does.
Yeah.
And they have made some adjustments to their equipment and believe they are meeting consistently the specs. The issue with the specifications is the actual test method that VTrans recommends, which is AASHTO 318, M318 test method. And it's difficult to use that particular test method on particles that size when it's made into PGA. So that's why VTrans and CSWD have been working with UVM Research Lab to come up with an alternative test method to use to demonstrate that the end product consistently meets their specifications.
Right, I remember you telling us about UVM last year. Is that study not completed?
It's not completed yet. They did a presentation a few months ago, I want to say. And they presented it. They have a student that's working on it. And they presented a bunch of different alternative methods, but I don't think they've landed on one yet. I think the study is ongoing. I think another thing that they're looking at, and we're certainly interested in, and VTrans mentioned this a while ago, is that they think that they may be able to use processed glass aggregate in place of sand for winter maintenance, because the processed glass aggregate doesn't carry the phosphorus that sand does, which would be a good road improvement and water quality improvement.
Well, thank you very much. And I don't know how much more leaning into trying to get that study completed so that we could see this used, but.
Yeah, we are continuing conversations. I've been participating in this recycled materials work group, which is led by VTrans. We're in conversations with the Senate Transportation Committee on how do we get some language into the T-bill to kind of push this forward. And, another step would certainly be to, once this product is made, we need to incentivize contractors in the state to use it if they're going to use it in road construction for a state contract. There's certainly, I think they mentioned that they're going to build, 94 miles of the Lamoille Rail Trail this year. So that would be a great pilot project for processed glass aggregate to see how it holds up.
Well, I'm guessing you've told someone about that suggestion.
We have, yeah. We have.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And with that, we're going to move to Ms. Susan Collins.
Hello, thank you very much for having me. I too would like to, good morning. I would like to make a presentation if I could be made a co-host.
Sure, and just so you know what our timing is, we have about 12, 13 minutes, so we adjourn for the morning. Hopefully that's a good fit for your presentation.
Okay, I'll make sure to, I'll juggle things a little bit and make sure I front load the good stuff.
Good idea. Yeah. And Ms. Collins, could you also please send your presentation into Ms. Newman, and that way we'll be able to come back to it later as well. Thank you.
Absolutely, will do. I'll tell you, I was making changes up until the last minute. Okay, so this didn't start at the beginning, so I'm going to go back to the beginning. You've already heard a lot of testimony today, and I don't want to repeat a lot of what you've already heard. And I do want to give you some new information. So I'm going to start by going off script a little bit and tell you about some new things that have happened that have just happened in the last year or so. One of them that was mentioned was that there was a new study that was released by the National Waste and Recycling Association regarding MRF processing costs. It was a very narrow study. It really just cherry picked that one, put a little box around a MRF and said, we're only going to look at these economic costs, and we're not going to look at what the impacts of bottle bills are on ratepayers and taxpayers or any other people across the value chain. But even that study was very interesting. And we produced an opinion piece that was published in Resource Recycling Magazine in response to the study. And some of the things that we found were that the study showed that a full bottle bill implementation in a state that didn't already have a bottle bill would decrease MRF revenues by about 10%. However, when people in Vermont are looking at that study, people in Vermont need to realize that the bottle bill already exists there, and it's already covering the highest value commodity, which is aluminum. So the impacts on any MRF in Vermont would be far less than that 10%. In addition, what the study found was that the per ton fee would go up for customers of the MRF, but the amount of tons would go down a lot, so much so that net, the customers of the MRF would be paying less. So they'd be paying more per ton, but with far fewer tons, they'd overall be saving money. And that is the same thing that has been found in more than 24 studies that have been conducted around the world on this same issue. So the ratepayers, the taxpayers, and municipalities save money with the implementation of a bottle bill or the expansion of a bottle bill. And this has been found over and over by different consultants doing different studies in different parts of the world. Go ahead.
Quick question. So I'm not familiar with the Container Recycling Institute. Can you just who you are and sort of who you represent, how you're funded, operate, all that stuff?
Sure. So sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Susan Collins. I'm the president of the Container Recycling Institute. We are a 501c3 nonprofit that has been in place for more than 30 years. Our mission is to make North America the global model for collection quality, high quality collection and recycling of packaging materials. So we study these programs and their environmental and economic impacts, mostly in North America, but around the world as well. And our funders come from every different part of the recycling of and manufacture of beverage containers, all the way from beverage container manufacturers to individuals, to foundations, to state agencies, to the US EPA. Everybody who's involved in this issue and wants to support more research in this issue is part of our membership.
Great, thanks so much.
Yes, of course, of course. So the other thing that we found about the new NWRA study on MRFs is that the impact, they looked at a typical MRF and they found that the impact of a full bottle bill, not a Vermont size expansion, but a full bottle bill would be about $2 million on the typical size MRF that they studied. But they also showed that the swing in commodity prices this year compared to the 5-year average was a $7 million impact on the typical MRF. In other words, 2 million versus 7 million, the impact of a full bottle bill was only about 1/3 the impact of the commodity swings that they already are experiencing with or without a bottle bill. So what is happening right now is a huge windfall for MRFs this year, and everybody's talked about how volatile the commodity prices are. So I'll start with a couple more pieces in my presentation. This first slide really just sets the stage to talk about beverage containers. The issue is sometimes trivialized, but beverage containers aren't trivial. This photograph shows one person.
Collins, we don't see any photos, just so you know.
So when I advanced my slide, it didn't work for you?
No.
We're seeing a vertical white bar at the moment on a black screen.
Then let's ignore the fact that I think I'm showing a photo and look at the same photo behind me because it's also my background. It looks a lot better if you see 8 people. It gives you a sense of the scale.
She didn't share.
Can you see my photo and the photo behind me?
Little bit.
Okay. What I mean to say is that it's a huge pile of beverage containers. It's 822 that each of us consume, every man, woman, and child on average in the United States. So it's not a trivial amount. And when I send the presentation, you'll see the lovely photograph. Let's try the next slide and see if this one shows up.
Not yet.
Okay, great. Not yet.
Not yet.
I'll just continue. And the slides will come afterwards. And I apologize for this technical difficulty we're experiencing.
No problem. Meanwhile, maybe you stop sharing your screen, then we will see you better.
Okay.
You can see what's behind you.
And we'll see the big picture.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay, great. Right, that's the 822 beverage containers of every type of beverage and every type of container. So what I was going to talk about was the impact of greenhouse gases and recycling, that essentially this is a climate change program. And that is one of the reasons that these programs are so popular worldwide. And it's one of the reasons that these programs are so popular with the manufacturers that have all made commitments to reduce their greenhouse gases. They're all watching their greenhouse gas inventory, and beverage producers know that the single greatest part of their own carbon footprint is the primary packaging. It's their beverage containers. It is number one. And the number one reason is the extraction of virgin resources. When you use recycled content instead of virgin content, you dramatically reduce the carbon footprint of your container. So the next thing I was going to point out is that also if we recycled all of our beverage containers nationally, instead of disposing of them, it would save enough energy to power 2.3 million American homes. And the more recycled content you're able to put in the containers, the lower the footprint of that individual container. So this is something that the beverage companies really need. But it's very difficult to get that without having very, very clean material. So here's the other super new piece of information. There was a new study done for the Canadian government by a consulting firm called Stina that works for the plastics industry. And the study involved talking to plastics manufacturers and other folks in the plastic value chain who make the plastic or who make the bottles. And they all said in the interviews, we can only make PET bottles that are food quality if we have food quality materials as our recycled content. And it's because the bottles that are used to make things like shampoo or things like Windex, those bottles are made not just with PET plastics, but they add other chemical additives. And those other chemical additives are banned from use as a food grade material. So that's why it's so important for them to get only food grade material. And indeed, now that there's a recycled content law in California, in the last year, bottle bill PET has tripled in price in California because now all the producers have to put recycled content in their PET bottles, and they're using the bottle bill material. The curbside material isn't suitable because of those chemical additives. So that's new information for you today. Another piece of new information for you today. You've heard people talk about the DSM study that was done that showed that containers that were not on deposit had a 67% recycling rate. But what you also heard people say was that the glass during that time period, some of it was being illegally disposed of in a closed landfill. Well, that illegally disposed of material is included in the numbers that are so-called recycling. So I made the adjustment. I subtracted that 6,000 tons and I put it in the landfill column instead of the recycling column, because indeed it was landfilled. It never should have been called recycling in the first place. And the recycling rate went down from 67% for containers to 56%. That's an adjustment that everybody should make. Nobody should be talking about a 67% recycling rate from that DSM study. In addition, contamination is in those numbers as well. So those contamination should also be eliminated in order to have an apples to apples comparison. Because when you're doing a recycling rate for beverage container materials, it's always apples to apples. It's always one container sold, one container redeemed. So that was the new information and the new studies. In addition to that, I did want to talk about what happens with curbside materials. I personally don't put any of my bottles and cans into the curbside bin because I know that 1 out of every 3 aluminum cans that's put in a curbside bin is mis-sorted into the wrong bale and never ends up being recycled. I know that 1 out of every 6 PET bottles that is put in a curbside bin is not recycled because it gets mis-sorted into the wrong bale and it's ultimately disposed of. This is not my information. These are independent studies that were done by others. The aluminum numbers and the PET numbers both come from a report that was done by the state of Oregon, where they sorted materials after they went through a material recovery facility. And you've heard from many people, and you've seen the photograph that Mike Noel showed of what happens with glass. Glass gets mangled before it ever even reaches the material recovery facility, because most of it in a curbside program gets broken up in a truck. And there's no new equipment that can be invented that will unbreak glass. Once that glass is broken, it can't be recycled. It's going to turn into part of the residue stream. And then the rest of it gets mixed with other trash. And that's why the facilities don't want to take that glass. So there's a huge difference between curbside and deposit material in terms of how much of it gets collected, how much of it is contaminated, and where it ultimately goes. And that at the end of the day is what we really want to achieve, is high quality recycling that can achieve the promise of recycling, which is to reduce energy and greenhouse gases. So I also had a little bit more information in my presentation, which you will receive later, about all of the places that have gone to 10 cents now. It's happened in Oregon and Michigan. Michigan has always had a 10-cent rate. Oregon changed from 5 cents to 10 cents a few years ago. And when they did, they saw their redemption rate increase from 64% to 86% in 2 years. And almost all of the Canadian provinces are already at 10 cents. Quebec is the last one, and theirs is scheduled to go to 10 cents in the next year or so. And then, of course, you heard earlier today that Connecticut also has increased their deposit value from 5 cents to 10 cents, and that will kick in about a year and a half. The last bit of news I have is that we just keep on hearing the good news about new deposit programs being passed around the world. The inventory now is up to 60 programs. They serve more than, once they're all implemented, they will serve more than 700 million people. And that is a more than doubling in the last 5 years. At the beginning of 2017, the programs only served a little under 300 million people. And pretty soon they will serve more than 700 million people. And we can see the writing is on the wall that it will soon go to 1 billion people worldwide served by container deposit programs. So they're enormously popular throughout the world. And in interest of time, I'll stop there. And again, I apologize for the slides problem, but I'll send them all to you.
Well, thank you very much for, a brisk presentation and overcoming technical issues. Seems like you have a lot of good information. I really appreciate you calling out timely new information, and also the fact that you looked at what's going on in Vermont and could do that sort of analysis on the what the real glass recycling rate is once you deduct the landfill glass, for instance. It's very helpful. I look forward to seeing your deck, and if we may, we might want to call you again, but we'll make sure that you're earlier in the schedule. We don't end up with abbreviated